Let's chant Om 3 times with me so I can come together with you through mantra vibration. Let's close our eyes. Bring our full attention to chanting. Let the sound vibrate fully inside of us. Om Shanti. Greetings. Thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be here with this. I wrote to my staff and the residents back in San Francisco, this dynamic Sangha. I feel such a lot of energy, a lot of interest, a lot of keenness. So I'll share with you a few thoughts. The title of this workshop is simply meant to convey that yoga is something that can be a part of our lives, every aspect of our lives. It's become popular as something we do on the yoga mat, as asana practice. And maybe some people know yoga also as a practice that includes breathing or pranayama. Maybe some people understand meditation. But a lot of people are not familiar with the idea that yoga is meant to be a way of life, not just a practice that we do occasionally or once a day. If we practice once a day, the impact it can have on our lives is somewhat limited. I'll speak about the potential that yoga has to offer us is to experience our divinity. I mean, this is really the goal of all the spiritual traditions. Maybe one thing that almost every spiritual tradition has in common is the idea that we are made in the image of God. And you can find something like that in the teachings of almost all the faiths. And in yoga, we understand that's not something that we conceptually understand. We're meant to experience this divine aspect along with our human aspect. But the world that we live in right now has created considerable obstacles toward that experience. In the Hindu culture, the culture out of which yoga emerged. So yoga is not Hinduism, but it's an understanding, a set of practices, a way of life that grew out of that culture. In the Hindu culture, there are different spans of time that have particular characteristics. And the age that we're living in is called the Kali Yuga. Maybe some of you have heard of that idea. A yuga is a vast expanse of time that has certain characteristics. And the Kali Yuga is the era, the age in which materialism is valued over spiritual understanding, over spiritual practice, over morality. So we find that the desire for accumulating material wealth predominates over many other spiritual values, and that the sort of natural inclination towards ethics and morals is compromised again and again in the name of wealth, in the name of power, in the name of accumulating material things. It's not too hard to imagine that. It's not too hard to see that in our world, isn't it so? Yeah. And if you've been around for very long, you've seen that it's kind of grown that way. It's grown in that direction. That those with wealth and power, like international corporations, very successful, large-scale businesses, those with a lot of wealth manage to have a great deal of influence over the governments of their countries, and therefore create policies and sustain policies that are towards their own benefit. And gradually, at least we see this in the US, and I think in the Western world in general, and gradually squeeze the poorer people in the middle class a little more at a time. Enough so that gradually enough that there's no like huge revolution against what's happening, that people accept what's, the little bit that's taken away from them, or the increase in the cost of living, and there's not much they can do about it. And then the institutions that are meant to look after people, the governments, especially of democratic countries, are supposed to be, in the words of the United States, by the people, for the people. But those governments are also corrupted and ultimately controlled a great deal by those who donate to their election funds. Right? So we end up with a situation where it's kind of a dark time, and spiritual values are diminished in the hearts of many people, because everyone's concerned about trying to take care of themselves. Of course, not everyone, but it's predominant in our world. And it makes it more difficult. In other words, the primary influence of the world around us, the messages of our culture are contradictory to our spiritual path. Encourage us to be focused on acquiring and achieving rather than searching on the spiritual path. So it makes it more challenging. And a yoga practice like a hatha yoga class is incredibly valuable, but that alone is maybe not enough to really go deep into the spiritual life. And it's ideal that we find ways to integrate the teachings and practices of yoga into our daily lives. And that's when it really has a chance to deepen and transform the way that we think, the way that we understand, the way we relate to the world around us, and to experience this profound sense of peace and joy that's our birthright. So something I've looked at quite a bit and been trying to think about and share is how we can integrate the various teachings and practices into our daily lives more fully. And that's what I'll share with you. Yesterday, I gave this talk, Healing the Dis-ease of Busyness. And one of the things I focused on yesterday, I'll just mention again briefly, the idea of creating a clear statement of a sort of overall arching purpose for this lifetime. And that's something that I recommend as a part of this comprehensive approach to yoga practice, to spiritual life, is each person reflecting for themselves and writing something. I recommend writing, not just sort of thinking about it, writing something that states for themselves in their own words what they see as the purpose of this lifetime and what do they want to achieve with this lifetime. We may have many smaller goals, but is there some overarching purpose that you see for being alive? Some ultimate thing that you want to experience, right, with this life? And that becomes a way, a source of guidance, a way of making decisions. That any of the major decisions that we make in our lives about where we live and how we spend our time and energy can be measured against this kind of ultimate vision of why we're here and what we want to experience. So that's one recommendation that I've been sharing as a part of this way of life that I'm describing. And I'll describe a number of more things to consider. But as I said yesterday, I'll invite any comments or questions from you all. Don't hesitate to raise your hand if you have a thought, if you have an example of what I'm talking about, or if you have a question, if something's not clear.
Thank you for being here. I have a question. For me, I am leading a spiritual life to the best of my ability. And I understand what you're saying to us of all these obstacles that are there. But my question is, we now have global interconnection and we can see all these obstacles, whereas in times before, they weren't visible, available for everyone to know. But these obstacles, most of them, I'm asking, were already there anyway. I mean, there was the highway robbers, there was the pirates, life was terrible in different ways. The only thing is now we can see it all of the time and we comment on it all of the time about how the world is. But hasn't the world mainly always been like that? That's my question. Hasn't Earth always negotiated through these different obstacles? They're only dressed in a different way.
It's a good question. And I wish I was better equipped to answer that. It's a difficult thing to consider history and the evolution of mankind. For sure, it's true that there's always been violence, there's always been wars, there's always been corruption, greed, and there's always been spiritual traditions, sincere people taking care of their communities and working for the well-being of others. So that dynamic has always been there in our world. It's true. It's debatable whether or not things have improved. Certainly, there's more awareness. There's no doubt about that. One more thing I would say, though, is that climate change, or what could be called the climate emergency, has probably worsened much more in recent years than it ever has before, just because of the population, the increase in population, and the increase in the ways that we've managed to pollute the earth, the manufacture of plastic, which didn't exist in times past. So there are a number of factors that have changed, both for the worse and for the better. So I'm not really sure. And it's an interesting question that's worth exploring. But for sure, it's worth considering right now how our lives are and what we can do right now. So that's what we can focus on. But we have a comment here.
I think my only observation is it's always existed, but it's, like you said, getting worse.
Mm,
When we had wars before, there was more morality in that they would stop at a certain time. They
mm,
would give time to
Mm.
bury the dead,
mm,
and it was respected.
mm,
You were not shot in the back. It
Yeah.
was face to face. You saw your enemy.
mm,
Now the enemy comes from above or
mm,
from the sea, and you don't see it coming. So it's always existed,
Mm.
but it has escalated, and more people are involved, and
Yeah.
more people have become materialistic
yeah.
rather than less.
Mm,
There's always been some, but
Mm.
it seems to be getting worse.
Mm.
Like you said, with the plastics and stuff,
yeah.
everything has escalated.
Mm, mm. It's true. You hear stories of how the soldiers from various armies would go away from the cities onto the battlefield and fight there, and then stop at a certain point. There was a certain kind of code, even amongst the warring parties. But now you hear it's that the Soviets are, or the Russians are bombing the civilians in the Ukraine. Not that the Russians are worse than any of the other Western countries. I don't know. It's hard to make any judgments about this. But let's not get too distracted by thinking about. Here's one more comment. Let's not spend too much time on speculating about history and where we are now.
I think that because of social media and how we are aware now of what's happening, people have become desensitized as well. So it's much more accepted than probably before, because we're all aware. And you become desensitized from a young age, unfortunately.
Mm, mm, true. True. Mm. It's an interesting question. Are we evolving in an overall sense? Are we evolving in a positive way? There definitely seems to be more spiritual awareness, at least. But see, the problem is I can say that in the circles that I move around in, but I don't move around in certain areas where there's less interest in spirituality. So I don't know for sure. So let me continue with some thoughts that I think can benefit all of us, that I found particularly useful, and many others have. And so one thing I've spoken about is really being clear about your own vision for this lifetime. The second thing is to work with resolving conflict within yourself. It's difficult for us to address conflict going on in the world around us, but many of us also have various forms of inner conflict where we feel compelled, or we have urges to do certain things, and then we have another part of us judging that aspect of ourselves. We feel bad about ourselves in certain ways. We feel conflicted about the choices that we have to make. We have addictive behaviors, probably many of us, even small ones, either with alcohol or with even television is a kind of escapist addiction in a way, with food, with drugs. There's so many forms of sort of escape from being aware and being present and really working with our lives in a healthy way. And it's difficult to overcome that as an obstacle, just the conflict going on within ourselves. But that is something that we can work with in a healthy way. And spirituality has a lot to offer us. The analogy I always like to draw when I talk about this is that of a physical pain. We all know that when you have a physical pain, a backache or a sore throat, any kind of pain, that the pain itself is a message. It's not the problem itself. Right? The pain is drawing our attention to something that needs healing, or needs to be taken care of. It needs to be repaired or restored. There's something that's not quite right in the body. And the way that we find out about it is through the pain. So if we can't discern the source of that pain, then we go to someone who can help us figure it out, right? A doctor, chiropractor, an Ayurvedic practitioner, many different health practitioners that might be able to help us. But we go to someone that can help us find the source, right? And address the source. And it's the same thing with our emotional pain. Somehow, when we were driving here and talking about the kind of what in the United States we've sometimes called the British kind of stiff upper lip, right? And I don't know that much about it, but the people I was driving with were confirming, yes, there's a tendency at least in the UK, I'm not sure if it's the same here, to kind of override one's emotions and be strong. I think they were saying that the Queen was a role model for that. That no matter what happened, she was always there for the people in a kind of dedicated way. But that many people kind of adopted that stance of kind of ignoring what they were feeling. And I know in the United States, there's a tendency in that direction, simply because emotions can be seen as a sign of weakness or as a kind of defect. Someone's not strong and self-reliant. Big boys don't cry. There's so many ways in which emotions might be seen as something unhealthy or unattractive, socially unacceptable. But in fact, our emotions are a form of psychological pain that are important for us to pay attention to and learn from. Emotions are meant to be experienced and felt and released rather than repressed. If you repress some emotion long enough, it finds its way out in various ways. It kind of gets tied up inside of you, and it leaks out, or it gets triggered when some event happens. And someone you've probably all seen someone, maybe you've experienced it yourself, where the anger is bottled up for a certain amount of time and then it explodes, right, in a volcanic way, because the last straw, and that person can't hold their anger back. Whereas the children are great role models for very simple relationship with emotions. The child is sad, it cries, it's done with it. The child has a fit of anger. You could call it tantrum yoga, where it kicks and screams, but then it's done with it, right? And it moves on. And we can learn a lot from that. And I'm not suggesting that we all practice kicking and screaming, but just that we're more accepting of our own emotional distress, that we allow ourselves to feel what we feel, that we take time to process what we feel. Women tend to generally be much better at that than men. And maybe that's not as much of an issue for women. But there still can be, in many of us, a tendency towards self-judgment, towards feeling bad about ourselves for one reason or another, rather than trying to understand ourselves and the sort of deeply ingrained things that may be still harming us. Many of us have made adaptations as children to circumstances that we couldn't control, and those adaptations might remain with us as unhealthy forms of behavior. And if we can be accepting of the things that we see within ourselves, bring them more into our awareness without judging ourselves, if we can learn to talk about the things that are the ways that we're suffering, our emotional distress, then we can bring healing to that aspect of ourselves. An example I often think of is parents tend to be very good at being there for their children and willing to listen with love and compassion for their children. You don't expect the children to be perfect and to be grown up. You know that they're going to struggle and they're going to make mistakes. And so we parents tend to be very compassionate with their children. And what I'm suggesting is that we can be the same with our own childish aspects, the childish aspects of our own minds and hearts, and learn to have compassion for ourselves, and at least stop this kind of inner conflict that may divert our energy and that may cause us to suffer. Does that make sense to you all?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. I remember, yeah, are you familiar with the teacher Ram Dass?
Yes.
I remember many years ago hearing him speak, and I was impressed by something that he said. He said, in all my years on the spiritual path, I never got rid of any of my neuroses. And that kind of got my attention. Like, wow, I always think of him as a great teacher, someone who's so honest and open and clear thinking. And he said, no, I never got rid of any of my neuroses. He said, but I became comfortable with them. I became friends with them. And he spoke about how when he sees pride or anger or anxiety arise in himself, he's able to be with that. And he said, he even gave this sort of analogy, or this way of relating to his own mind. He said, oh, there you are, anger. Have a seat here. Tell me what you're about. Let me hear from you. What do you have to tell me? So that really struck me as healthy. So rather than be disappointed in himself, I'm a spiritual person, I shouldn't be angry. He was able to be real and honest with himself and learn from that and have compassion for that aspect of himself. So that was a great lesson for me. So it's such a relief to be able to be honest about our mistakes, about our shortcomings and what we have to learn. It feels so much better than trying to protect an identity, trying to look good and sustain some way of appearing to others. Does that make sense to you all? It's so common in our world, right? So that's one thing that I like to share as a part of the spiritual path, is when we do notice that we're suffering, that we're struggling emotionally, that we're distressed, to give attention to that, have compassion for ourselves, because we learn so much. In a way, our distress, our suffering is some area of our lives that's being exposed to us. It's an opportunity to learn. It's being shown to us, right? That we have something that needs our attention. One of the benefits of getting to know ourselves that way and being realistic about who we are and what we can accomplish is that we can set healthy goals for ourselves, right? Whenever we set goals for ourselves on the spiritual path, like I want to meditate regularly, I'm going to practice hatha yoga regularly, I'm going to practice certain virtues regularly. Whenever we attempt to take a step forward in our spiritual life and discipline ourselves, we can only do that if we really know where we are now. The example I always think of, an analogy for that, just walking down Main Street, several times we ran into one of these maps. I love maps, so I always pause to look at the map and to see where we are. And if you know you want to go somewhere, and you can look on one of these maps and see where you want to go, like, oh, there's where the Integral Yoga Center of Gibraltar is, right? But before you can take a step in the right direction, what do you have to find on the map? Where you are now, as a part of this way of life, the need for some regular meditative practice, right? Like a hatha yoga class, or forget hatha yoga class, your own personal practice. One of the benefits of the integral yoga way of teaching hatha yoga is there's a certain kind of format or structure to it that a person can learn and practice on their own. And if you don't have time for a whole class, you can practice for 20 minutes in your own home. You do a forward bend, you do some warming up, you do a forward bend, you do a backward bend, you do a little twist or an inversion, a little relaxation, some breathing, right? And you're good to go. But in order to develop a regular practice, you have to be clear about what are the other demands in your life. How much self-discipline do you have? You have to build up your willpower step by step by step. You can't expect yourself to get up an hour earlier if you're used to getting up at a certain time. It's probably good to get up 10 minutes earlier and do that for a month or two, and then 10 minutes earlier, and gradually grow your commitment to a personal practice, a practice that's sustainable. It's better to meditate 5 minutes a day if that's what you can manage, but make it a habit. Do it regularly. Don't skip out. Right? And then if you enjoy it, if you're finding some benefit, then move to 10 minutes a day. And like that, grow your practice in a sustainable way, rather than fits and starts, rather than practicing for a while and then stopping. I would guess that many people that try to develop a regular practice have had this experience of keeping it up for a short period of time, and then when life gets a little difficult or there's more demands on your schedule or something unusual happens, then the practice falls away for a period of time. So any of you that have studied the Yoga Sutras know that it says your practice becomes well established over a long period of time without break, and with all your heart, right? So that's an example of knowing yourself well and knowing what your schedule is like and the other demands on your life. You can make a commitment that's doable, that's sustainable, that's realistic. Right? Another characteristic of a good goal is it's measurable. If you say, I'm going to meditate for a little while, that's not measurable. It's too vague. It should have a measurable goal. So then you know that you did it a certain amount of time. Does that make sense to you all? Yeah. I'm sure that's something that you're already aware of. The ideal of a regular meditative practice that could be a combination of, ideally, a combination of both physical, working with the physical body, working with the breath, and some meditation, right? Working with the mind itself in a focused way. That would be the ideal.
I've been through hard times with my husband passing.
Yeah.
And so the meditation, when it happened, it was like every time I sat down, everything I did with my mind was go through everything that had gone through with him and everything that he suffered and everything else, you know? So what I found through all this is that I'm finding compassion towards myself now, not to be so hard, that there's a time and a place and then I have to give myself time for it. And it's something I found very hard, and my friends close to me have been telling me all along, you know, give yourself time and everything will come back to itself again, you know. But that's something that, because after so many years of practice and all of a sudden not being able to sit and do what I can do so easily, it was playing on my mind, and that was very hurtful for myself. Until I started to listen to the words of being more compassionate to yourself, give yourself time.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful to see. Thank you for sharing that. It's such a good example of exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. I mean, when you lose your life partner, of course, you're going to grieve for some time. It's the most natural thing. Yeah. And that's going to change the meditation practice for some time. Yeah. I know when I just remember clearly when my father died, and I went through a period of just not being interested in anything in my work. I don't know. I just went through a period of kind of losing interest in the things that I normally was engaged in life. It just took a while for me to shift out of that that sense of kind of depression or flagging energy. Yeah, it's natural. Hmm. Someone else had a comment or a question in the back?
Well, kind of answered it. The journey is never linear, is it?
Yeah.
And what I wonder if you had any experience or any advice to give us what to do when you fall off that spiritual wagon. How do you get back up? You know, whether you've learned any techniques or any advice that you can give us or any.
It's a great question because we've all been there. You know, I love to hike, and I love to hike in places where you get sort of high up and you have a view. And I noticed that when those who make the trails for these kind of scenic views, that the trail never just goes like that. You know what I mean? The trail goes like this, and then like that, and then like that, and then like that. So it almost seems like you're not going in the right direction because you're going that way when you want to go up here, but you're going that way. Life is a lot like that. It's difficult to go straight through because of all the factors. And then, like you say, even when we have the best of intention, we go through difficult times when life gets particularly difficult or stressful. Somebody that you love dies, somebody needs so much extra attention. There's a crisis, right? That you need to take care of someone, or you fall sick, you get COVID, you can't practice for some time, you travel, any number of different things can happen that kind of throw you off your normal routine. A few things I can share. One is have some kind of minimal practice. Even if you practice normally for 20 minutes or a half an hour or an hour, or you practice normally twice a day, have some minimal practice that you go back to as soon as you can, so that even when you feel like you don't want to practice or you don't have time, you can still do this minimal practice. And maybe it is the 5 minutes. I have this for myself with asana practice. I love to meditate, so I meditate pretty easily, regularly. Even if I'm traveling, I'll meditate on the plane, in the airport, whatever I have to do. But with asana practice, sometimes I just don't feel like it. I'm a little tired. I don't feel quite right. So I have this sort of agreement with my mind to do the minimal amount, just a few asanas. And even when I don't feel like it, my mind is sort of agrees, all right, we'll do the minimal practice, right? You have to have a meeting with the whole board up here. Get all the different voices, even the voice that doesn't believe in asana practice at all. I don't want to do it, right? You have to all kind of meet and agree on something, negotiate. Right? So in my mind, we've agreed on a certain minimal practice, and everybody agrees. All right, we'll at least do that. All right. And what happens is if I do that minimal practice and I'm feeling, oh yeah, that feels good, then I find that I often end up doing a little more. But if not, I just do that minimal amount. So that's one thing, is to have a minimal kind of amount of practice, that you at least do that, even if it's a small amount, because then you sustain the habit. Right? And, you know, even if you have to do it on the bus, even if you can only spend a few minutes, it's still worthwhile sustaining that intention to keep a practice going in some way. And the other thing I recommend that you have very strong here is to come back to the group practice. That's so helpful. All of us go through periods where we find it difficult as individuals, difficult to do at home. Come back to a group practice. And of course, you probably can't do a group practice every day, but even once a week with the group. So if you can just get yourself into the room here, the rest will carry you forward. Right? Another suggestion, a practice partner. So even if you can't come practice with the group, if you have a friend that also has the intention for a regular practice and believes in it, You can have someone that you talk to about your practice, or that you talk to about how you're struggling with your practice, and they're there for you, and they listen to you, and they remind you. Some of you know I came here from a small town near Almeria called La Cinta. It's a little town. I don't know, there's even 40 or 50 homes in this little village that's amongst some other villages near, how do you say it? Almeria. Almeria. Yeah, Soul Yoga. This woman that teaches there Soul Yoga, her name is Maya. And during the pandemic time, when she wasn't able to have classes in person, she was teaching online. She was struggling with her practice. And a friend of hers, another yoga practitioner, a woman named, that some of you will know, named Parvati, that lives in Milano. They started practicing together. And they've been doing it now for a year and a half at least, right? Where they practice together online. There you go, practice partner, right? Who knew that Zoom would become used in that way, right? Boy, who owns Zoom business? They sure did well with the pandemic. Oh my gosh, wow, imagine. So it's just an example of a practice partner. It's really helpful. And not someone to scold you if you're not practicing, but to be there for you as a friend, as a supporter, as someone who understands. And encourages you, inspires you. So if you make a commitment to practice with your partner, or at least to talk about your practice, that will help a lot. Oh, good. But just I appreciate the question, because just the recognition that this is a natural part of spiritual life, is that there are going to be periods when it's difficult, or when you stop for a period of time and then you need to start up again. Good. Thank you for that. Another suggestion of a series of suggestions that I want to make, how to make spirituality a part of the everyday life. And this is a very good one, because you can only spare, many people are very busy earning a living, taking care of their families, taking care of their homes, maybe doing some kind of service or social work, community work. So many people don't have that much time to do meditation, hot yoga class. But there are certain things that we can do with all of the day. And one of them is to pick a teaching to work with for a period of time. Something as simple as gratitude or contentment. Some of you will know that in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, one of the main scriptures of yoga, there are 5 yama and 5 niyama. And those principles or teachings are things that you could work with that don't require any extra time in your schedule. There's something you could work with in whatever you're doing. An example of them, of one of them, is santosha, contentment. And imagine, contentment is a practice you can work with anytime. No matter what you're doing, you can ask yourself, can I be at peace with the way things are right now? Can I be at peace with my body, with my mind, with my situation, with the present moment as it is? Right? What a great practice to attempt to be content with the way things are right now. Can I be content with the fact that I just missed the subway? Maybe you don't have a subway here. The bus, the line, coming or going, right? Yeah, the queue, right. Yeah, we were in the queue going in. Yeah. Can I accept the fact that I have a flat tire, right, without going crazy? It's one of the challenges of modern life, is to be ready to go somewhere and excited to go, and to know your timing well, and to be ready to go, and then to be stopped by something, right? A flat tire, heavy traffic, any number of things that can happen, right? The person that stops double parked in the streets and you can't pass by because they're unloading or loading or something, right? There's always something. So the point is to pick some teaching, and there are endless examples of what you could pick, but it should be something simple that you could just work with throughout the day for a period of time. So in San Francisco, the residents of the Institute there are 8 of us living together. We pick a teaching or a principle for a month, and we work with it for each month. And we see how we can incorporate that teaching into the way that we're living. There's a teaching that I particularly like from Swami Satchidananda. And there are many of these in the Golden Present. Some of you know that book, The Golden Present. There's a reading for each day of the year, right? And one of those readings talks about life should be fun. And I thought, that's the spiritual teaching that I like. Life should be fun. But it says any kind of fun that later is painful, right? That's not really good quality fun, right? Real good quality fun, enjoyment should have a lasting effect. It shouldn't be painful later, right? And an example that I always think of is that for me, a hot fudge sundae is great fun while you're eating it, and then it's painful for hours afterwards because of the heaviness in the stomach. Just doesn't work well for me, the hot fudge sundae. I'm sorry for those of you that might really enjoy that. But you know what I mean. Going to a party. Okay, party could be great fun, but if you end up with a hangover and a headache the next morning, it's not good enough quality fun. So his point was, you should choose fun that's lasting, that's good quality fun. Yeah, that makes good sense. Top quality fun, right? Fun that's lasting. Ahimsa, nonviolence. And of course, nonviolence is kind of termed in a negative, refraining from harming other people. But if you kind of switch it into a positive, you could call it compassion or kindness. Right? And there's a great practice. I think it's that, I forget if I mentioned that, maybe it was in at Soul Yoga that I mentioned this quote from the Dalai Lama. I'm fairly certain it was the Dalai Lama that said, kindness is my religion. Wow, what a great simple practice. So practicing kindness for a week, any number of things. You know how it is when you're reading a book and you say, wow, that's really good for me to remember, and you highlight those few lines in the book. But if you put the book down and you forget about it, then it doesn't have a lasting impact. So if you take those few lines in the book and you create some catchword to remember that teaching that's really impactful for your life, then you carry it with you for a week or 2 weeks or a month. Then you really integrate it into the way that you live. And so that's another suggestion from my set of suggestions, to integrate some teaching. And then you have some way of bringing your spiritual intention to life in any given moment. Something that I spoke a little bit about yesterday. Most of us have some livelihood or some work, some service that we do. Maybe not everyone, maybe some of you are retired. But a beautiful practice is to bring your spirituality into that livelihood, into that work, no matter what it is. I think it was you today, Tanya, that mentioned ways that you bring your spiritual practice into your work. Tell them what work you're doing. And
So I'm a cleaner for the Department of Education. So when my boys were little, it was really good, the hours, for looking after my children. So I didn't have anyone to look after them. So I would, those hours were perfect. And then yoga came into my life. So the plan was, when the boys got older, I would be doing something else. But now my job is perfect because it allows me to do yoga. And when I'm at work doing my cleaning, I'm doing my mantras, my positive affirmations, all my prayers. So yeah, it's I feel blessed to have that job because it allows me to do all of this.
yeah, that's exactly.
Thank you, Swami.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Tanya. And anyone can do that with any kind of work that they do, is find a way to spiritualize it. One of the ways to do that is offer a prayer before you begin your work. Just to dedicate your time and energy to doing your very best. To ask to be guided or to be an instrument of the divine in whatever way is meaningful. There's so many different ways to make the work that we do a part of our spiritual life. Just to consider the well-being of others is a spiritual practice. When you think in yoga, we understand God is not something, a supreme being somewhere else outside, a spiritual light within everyone. So when we think of the well-being of everyone, when we show care and respect for the spirit of everyone, right, then we are leading a spiritual life. It doesn't have to be an overtly spiritual life, but just the idea that we love, serve, respect the well-being of everyone, even those whose behavior is hurtful, even those criminals. Just yesterday, we visited someone in the local prison, a very sincere young man who one day I hope will become a part of the Sangha here. Everyone has this spiritual light inside of them, even those that aren't awake to it within themselves. So that's a spiritual practice, to put love and care into whatever work that we do. Make it a service. Another element of a healthy spiritual life, a way of life, you all already have, and that is a strong spiritual community, a Sangha, and spending time with that group. I spoke a little bit about that yesterday as well. That being able to walk the spiritual path with others who have the same intention is invaluable. It's impossible to do alone. Very, very difficult. Maybe not impossible, but very difficult. And so much more enjoyable, so much more fun, so much more sustainable when we do it together with others like-minded. Let me pause here and see if there are any questions. Any of you online, any questions any of you might have, or any of you here. Just want to make space for that. Okay, no questions. Good. I'll share one more thing then. I spoke even more yesterday about the importance of some kind of regular meditative practice. And for sure, to me, probably the most essential spiritual practice is meditation. But I also want to encourage everyone to practice some form of asana or hatha yoga, asana pranayama, as these have unique qualities. Meditation is challenging. It's challenging to take hold of and learn to master the mind without working with the physical and energy body. One of the great benefits of hatha yoga, if it's practiced properly, is that we learn to be sensitive to our bodies. In the name of accomplishing tasks in our world, we often override the messages of the body, right? In order to push through, in order to accomplish things, right? And we often ignore the feelings in our hearts in the name of, again, accomplishing things, achieving goals. Hatha yoga helps us bring ourselves back into the present and see what's actually going on right here, right now in this body. It helps us, if we practice correctly, it helps us be guided by the messages of our own body rather than imposing on the body how we want it to be. And that's a very beneficial practice, just to come back into the present and be aware of really what we're feeling, both in the physical level and in the energetic level, in the emotional level. So I'll just throw in that encouragement to do some regular hatha yoga practice. And ideally, in a form like we teach within integral yoga, where everyone's encouraged to respect their own bodies and their own capacity. I want to respect your time and not take too much time. But could we take a few minutes to meditate together? Yeah, let's do that. Let's do a little bit of call and response chanting, leading into just a few minutes of silent meditation. And what I want to suggest is that as the chant ends and we meditate, see if you can really give yourself permission. Just for a few minutes, you don't need to think about anything. So when we meditate, we don't want to wrestle with the mind and try to make the mind be still. But I love the idea of that we all deserve a rest from thinking. We think all the time. So you deserve a rest. And that doesn't mean that you're going to stop the mind from thinking. It's sort of the mind thinks, that's what it does. But you can feel that you withdraw your attention from all of that and rest from it by giving your attention in your one chosen direction on a mantra or watching the breath, whatever focal point you have. That's your method of resting from the thinking. I like that association with resting, right? Rather than forcing or trying to repress the thinking, to think that you can rest from it. So let's chant a little bit responsively, and then we'll meditate for a few minutes, just a few minutes. Shambho, Shambho, Shivaya Nama Om, Shivaya Nama Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om, Shivaya Nama Om, Shivaya Nama Om, Shivaya Nama Om, Shivaya Nama Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om, Hari 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 Om, Hari 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 Om, Hari 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 Om, Hari 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 Om, Shivaya Nama Om, Shivaya Nama Om, Shivaya Nama Om, Shivaya Nama Om, Hari 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 Om. With our closing chants, put our full attention. Think of the meaning of these chants as we offer them. Asato ma sadgaya, tamaso ma jyotirgaya, mrityo ma mritangaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from unreal to real. Lead us from darkness to the light. Lead us from the fear of death. Knowledge of immortality. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light. May the light of truth dispel all ignorance. Victory is that light. Jai Sri Satguru Maharaj Ki Jai. Thank you all for your attention.